Hi everyone, my name is Liukas. I'm a children's book author, illustrator, and programmer from Helsinki originally, but currently living in Paris. And I promised to share with you today some summer inspiration and ideas for curriculum development going forward, with the special perspective I've had throughout my career, which is how do we introduce a little bit of play to the world of computer science, especially in the early years. But I'm hoping that this little spiel will give you ideas about how to introduce these ideas for older kids as well. This is where I started my career from roughly 10 years ago. The idea that if coding is the next universal language, in addition to grammar classes, we need more poetry lessons. And what I mean with that is the idea that we don't learn a language only by conjugating the grammar rules. I, for one, have learned that I don't learn French by only practicing the different nouns or verb conjugations. I learn a language by singing it, by dancing it, by flirting it, by just experiencing it. And in the same vein, I think coding and computer science and computation at large are languages, and we need more diversity in the ways we are teaching them. And to remedy this, I started writing these picture books about computer science and computing that have been translated into over 40 languages. And I'm often asked, aren't these ideas very um, right now? Don't these ideas get outdated quite quickly? But I've learned that whether it's about computational thinking and coding, the hardware of computers, networks around computers, or machine learning and AI, the very big ideas of computer science, they've stayed the same for almost 80 years, with some differences, of course. Tools and applications change, and there's always leaps in what computing can do. But the big ideas, they remain the same. And I think that's the reason why we need to see them in educational systems as well. And for a long time, my focus has been on stories because, in many ways, narratives and stories are the way we learn about the world. But more recently, I've really started to think about making things tactile and how we can take these very abstract ideas of computer science and turn them into embodied experiences. And on this journey, there's been a few people who have really inspired me. This here is Maurice Sendak, the author and illustrator of, for example, the wildly popular Where the Wild Things Are book series. And as a children's book author, he gets a lot of messages from kids. And once he got a message from a little boy who said, "I love your book so much." And Sendak dutifully, he responds and says, "Thank you," and draws a little doodle for him. And nothing happens for a few weeks until Sendak gets a message from the boy's mom who says, "My son loved your message so much, he ate it." And I think this is what it's like to be young in the world. It's a reminder of how we use our entire bodies. We are so visceral. We experience things with our entire bodies. And I think there's honestly nothing new about this when it comes to computer science and mathematics. Already in the 1950s, Jean Piaget said that you can't offer an entirely organized intellectual discipline with pre organized vocabularies and concepts, but rather that true learning is grounded in action. And I think Piaget would argue that computer science belongs in the same category as mathematics. And this is super small text, I'm not going to read it out aloud. But Seymour Papert, the sort of grandfather of all of the modern programming languages intended for children, he spoke often about Mathland as an idea of where we could experience and explore computation. And his big worry was that we are talking about mathematically abled kids in the same way as we would never talk about kids who learn French in Finland being abled in French or like French inclined, just by virtue of not being surrounded by French culture all day long. And I think it's a blend. So obviously we need these instructive activities and tasks that are about predetermined single correct response and real and practice oriented ideas. But I think what computer science education really needs is also to expand the way we design pedagogically into manipulable or even constructive side of things that are open-ended, that have flexible solutions and sort of this guided discovery for students. And a lot of the ways I move on this axis, I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's all the different types of designs, is through play. And a big thing for me has been realizing that what I actually enjoy working in is this weird intersection of early years computing and educational learning sciences and developmental psychology, all done with our hands. So I think any good activity for me starts with coming up with a good question. And good questions are important because they can haunt us for 10, 15 years. So if you find a good question, keep to it. One of the best questions I've asked is this very innocent question called, what is inside a computer? And we all know the answer to this, but depending on who you ask, you get a very different answer. If you ask a 7-year-old, a computer science teacher, a computer science professor, an engineer, or like a sales clerk, you get very, very diverse answers. And I don't ask the kids to actually write what they think is inside a computer. I ask them to draw it because I think drawing as a medium allows more flexibility. Kids especially are more prone to taking risks when drawing, and they don't necessarily have the fancy abstract language they can hide behind, but drawing allows them to kind of directly talk about what they see. And I've received answers ranging from bits to ones and zeros to files to all kinds of charades going on inside of computers. And I think the important bit here is to recognize what the mental model of how a computer works for a kid is based on, and kind of justify and change the teaching according to that. But good questions can lead us further also. This question of what is inside a computer, it prompted us to build actual role-playing activities around computing. And the kids got to experience what it feels like to be the RAM memory that runs between the GPU, the CPU of the computer and the hard drive of the computer, or the ROM memory that goes to wake everyone up in the morning. We've also built more abstract ideas of computer science. So for Neumann architecture, which is still the architecture we build our computers around, was designed in the 1960s or 70s. And a little bit simplified, what von Neumann architecture states is that a computer is any device where you input data, you process that data somehow, and out comes the modified data. So a von Neumann machine is when you click on a like button on Facebook, in goes the information, and out comes the updated like count. But it's also true when you sit in a car and you forget to buckle your seatbelt. In goes from the sensors information that someone is sitting here while the seatbelt is unbuckled. Out comes the beep, beep, beep noise we hate so much. And maybe having a framework like this for understanding what computers are, instead of saying that a computer is a device with a screen and a keyboard, is a healthier place for kids who will grow up with vastly different computers from the ones we use today. But back to play. So what we did once was build this gigantic input-output machine where the kids actually physically became the input data. They crawled inside of the machine. They read the little instructions like come out, jumping on one leg or crawling out backwards. And they had this embodied experience and memory of what an input-output machine feels like. We also explored more abstract ideas like algorithms. So this here is a cardboard YouTube, and the kids' task is to first design their own YouTube video. And this is a very motivating task for kids and nicely tracks to a lot of English language arts ideas. So the kids first need to plan what happens in the video first, the beginning and the middle and the end. They talk about titles and descriptions and how they are different and different kinds of tags and so forth. And then they perform their videos. So in this case, I had this little girl from Japan who had just recently relocated to Helsinki. And her English wasn't yet really good, but she had seen a really awesome video about making heart origami. So she recruited two of her classmates who folded the origami, and she read out the instructions inside of the cardboard. And when the video was done, I first asked the kids to do thumbs up, because that's what you do on YouTube. And then I said, let's hear some comments. And the kids would shout, that was epic, would subscribe, more of this. And I could see the beaming of the little girl when she realized that she was doing something that everyone else was admiring. And I think she will not have a hard time. We will not have a hard time remembering what an algorithm is, because after that we started talking about how do you actually see the videos you see on YouTube, and how there's an algorithm, which is really a step-by-step instruction for showing you the video that you're likely going to be stuck watching for the longest possible time. And how does the algorithm know? Well, it looks at your browsing data, it looks at your location, it looks at the likes and the reviews of the videos, it looks at tags and so forth. And then we also talk about how every single child in the classroom has seen something weird on YouTube. These kind of like videos that seem almost a little bit unnatural, like Surprise Play-Doh, X Peppa Pig, Stamper Cars, Pocoyo, Minecraft, where like something weird and sometimes even creepy happens. And then we talk about how there's entire content farms that only produce videos that are meant for the algorithm to discover, not for the kids, for the algorithm. And we get into really, really interesting discussions through this. The biggest project I've done so far around this playful embodied computing is one I did in Ruoholahti in Helsinki. This is a playground direly in need of a revamp, and I went to the mayor of Helsinki and said, let's build a computer playground, because playgrounds are amazing. Kids are already doing a lot of the things we wish they did in school. They are self-directed, they are doing project-based learning, they are conflict resolving themselves. We grown-ups are always there present, but we are not directing the action. And for some reason, playgrounds still only have castles and pirate ships, if you're lucky. And what if we could offer a public free good for everyone to learn about the big ideas of computer science in a fun, new way? I did a lot of benchmarking for this project, and I looked around the world for inspiration and ideas. And one of the big ideas was also to involve educators and teachers into the design process. So, as much as there was hardware, which was the Parks and Recreation Department, who actually helped me build the play structures, there was also the software of the park, meaning the curriculum for educators and parents who could come to the park and learn something with their child or even themselves. And we also involved the kids and had some very interesting discussions with the public school kids in the neighborhood, roughly 300 of them, talking about what is something that they are really proud about building on their computer, and what is something that they are proud about building in the playground. What about something that made them afraid on a computer or a phone? And what about something that made them afraid on the playground? What is the most fun thing that has happened for them on a playground, and what is the fun things they do what are the fun things they do on a phone? And it was really interesting, I think mainly for us adults, to be able to talk with a generation of children who might often experience public playgrounds or public spaces of coming together as fortnight lobbies, not as the neighborhood playground, who might be fiercely proud about the things they build on Minecraft in a way that we grown-ups don't always have vocabulary to describe, because our childhood included building huts in the forests, or if we're lucky, anyways, a more physical, a tangible world. And I think we both need this dialogue. The children should be shown how amazing outdoors play can be. And likewise, we grown ups can learn to appreciate the things and experiences and also the fears they have online. The best part was the design development, where I got to work with an amazing Danish playground company called Monstrum, and they translated many of the visions into real world structures and buildings. The construction phase was really amazing too, and eventually last October, the playground opened, and it was really wild to see all of the kids running around and basically jumping in the things that had existed only a moment ago in my notebook alone. And a lot of the stuff here is very open-ended, so you can play in a multitude of ways with different age groups. And one of the nice things we included were these QR codes, where you have a little prompt. So, for instance, here's the binary abacus we designed, and there's a prompt that says, "Can you form your favorite letter as a binary number. So it doesn't really like require a lot of thinking or trying out in advance. But then if you click on the QR code and take a photo of it, you'll be directed to a website where you can learn more about binary and more about how it relates to computers. And I've heard from parents that they really enjoy this too. And then for educators, we did this educator's guide that has this very, very sort of hands-on like material for any teacher from early childhood all the way to secondary school to take a field trip and what they should do before the visit, during the visit, after the visit, assessment, and so forth and so forth. And one of the beautiful things I think about working with educators was that their ideas were so tangible and real. And what I really appreciate about the process you're going through right now, because you know your classrooms, you know your reality. So I had designed this flowchart activity that kind of teaches you programming logic. There's like sequencing and selection and loops and like this little maze where you can practice walking according to instructions, but it's super open-ended. And the educators, they came to me and said, this is amazing, but we need more guidance. We need something physical that we can hold our hands with our hands. So we came up with the idea of making these laminated cards for the educators that they can take to the playground. And for instance, for the asphalt code, there's the little activity and like clear guidance of what to do. But then there's also the city level digital competency objectives and the nation level curriculum connections for them to quickly just make the mental check that, oh, it belongs to this part or this part. And also what age group and kind of broadly the goals the activity is hitting. And these proved to be quite popular among the educators. And to really make sure that the educators come to the playground and experience it, we designed these posters that could be sent um, to teachers in their teaching lounge and so forth. So why am I talking about all of this? Well, the value of finding good questions is obvious. You can spend a lifetime when you find a good enough question just figuring out how to work with it. But I think the reason why I'm talking about all of this is because having a fearless and curious attitude towards computing is vastly important in a world where computers in our life and age have changed from computers that fill entire rooms to computers that fit into backpacks to the next phase where computers become part of our very environment for watches or furnitures or wearables or even our physical environment. And I think the inspiration I seek when I'm thinking about how do we design curriculum and education for a generation of kids who will be in workforce for the next 20 years or within the next 20 years or 12 years is not to look too much advice from the industry because they have their current pressing needs. They think in quartals, but to look for inspiration from something a bit that has a bit more like longevity. And my biggest inspiration comes from a tiny Italian municipality called Reggio Emilia. It's a early childhood municipal educational philosophy. That's what they call it. And it's a pity because it kind of gets mixed up with Montessori a lot and it's rarely known outside of early childhood community, but it's so gorgeous and beautiful. So basically, the Italians discovered after the Second World War that they had lost an entire generation of kids and they needed to rethink the way they teach early childhood education. And in this tiny municipality, Reggio Emilia, Loris Malaguzzi and his collaborators, they devised this plan or this idea. Instead of writing a strategy paper or a vision brief, they wrote a poem. And the poem is called The 100 Languages, where Malaguzzi and his collaborators said that the child has 100 languages of exploring the world. The 100 languages include the language of singing, the language of discovering, the language of crawling, the language of painting, the language of computation, if you will. But so often we at school say that no, 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 you only have the language of reading and writing. And we say that work and play, science and imagination, reason and dream don't belong together. But luckily the children know. And maybe the 100 languages can offer us a little guidance going forward. I'm going to wrap up by a final short story that maybe tells a little bit more about the educational side or the educator side of this. So far, I've mostly talked about the children. This intervention is another question of mine that has been kind of rattling in my brain for a long time. It's called Draw the Internet, Where Are You? And throughout the years, I've received a lot of different explorations into the internet. Sometimes there are apps, sometimes there are flowers and clouds and physical infrastructure of the internet. And a few years ago, I was in Virginia in a small county called Winchester, visiting a school, and we were all in the school library that had very, very thick carpeting. And the kids were like on the floor, and they had the papers, and they had very, very pointy pencils. And what happened was that one of the boys accidentally punched through the paper. And he raised his hand and says, Miss Liukas, this is ruined. This doesn't work anymore. I need a new paper. And I went to him and we started exploring together the piece of paper. And I said, it's funny because the internet itself, it is made of fiber optic cables that go at the bottom of the sea. They come from Scotland to New York. They travel these underground, under like earth cables, and the way information travels there is it's literally flashes of light that go on and off. And if you raise this piece of paper and flick it, like you can kind of see the pulses of life. So in a way, you didn't ruin it in any way. It's rather a beautiful abstraction of the internet. And the boy would beam a little bit, and then I would notice the girl next to him start punching out her piece of paper as well. And then the girl or boy next to him, and the child next, and so forth, until we had a lot of punched papers at the end of the lesson. So they learned also about another part of the internet, which is how ideas spread in a network and the virality of an idea when you have a good one. And I think the beauty here was the fact that we had enough time. We were not in a rush. The classroom teachers were there. They were assisting and helping us out. And we had time to stop and like observe and look at the drawing and come up with other solutions and other observations. And this time it was me who came up with the idea, but often it's the opposite, where the children themselves come up with the most poetic renderings or kind of ideas around the work they do. But that requires time, and that requires slowing down, that requires an open-mindedness when it comes to computer science and computation and coding activities that I know is rarely available in a classroom nowadays. I want to wrap up with a final story from Loris Malaguchi, because I think when we talk about computer science, we talk about all these different layers. We've talked about coding and programming. We talk a lot about computer science, computation, and AI and machine learning. And I want to kind of narrow down back to computation, because I think that's the thing that we're going to be teaching still in 50 years' time. And Malaguzzi has said the following. He says that the language of mark making and drawing is one of the many languages children carry with them in their life experiences, a natural language that belongs to all children and that continually and constantly mixes with all the other languages. And I wholeheartedly agree. That's why I use a lot of drawing in the workshops I do. But I would argue that we could almost replace mark making and drawing with the word computation and get a very, very interesting rendering of what the future might look like. So let's try. The language of computation is one of the many languages children carry with them in their life experiences. A natural language that belongs to all children and that continually and constantly mixes with all the other languages. And that's a curriculum I would love to see. I want to thank all of you for the hard work you've put into building a completely new kind of curriculum around computing. And I just want to encourage you to think about play as an aspect of it. I want you to close your eyes and think for a moment about a playground moment you've had. One of those joyful, playful moments where everything flows at work or at a hobby, whether it's team building or a successful experiment or just a really well done cooking, cooking a dinner. And think about how do you create more of those moments intentionally with the work you do right now. How do you create more playground moments when it comes to computer science education? I hope you have a wonderful summer, a peaceful, restful time to think about your work. We'll see you in the fall. And if any of this was interesting to you, I write a bi weekly letter about childhood, computer science, and culture on that address over there. Thank you and enjoy.